3 days after the battle, the hospital ship Healing Touch was filled with the sound of children's laughter for the first time in months. The 42 rescued kids were getting stronger every day, and their families had arrived from across human space to be reunited with them. Jake Morrison stood in the main medical bay, watching as parents hugged their children with tears streaming down their faces. Billy, the red-haired boy from New Texas Colony, was clinging to his mother like he would never let her go again. "I knew you would come find me, Mom," Billy said. "I knew you wouldn't give up." His mother, Carol, was crying too hard to speak. She just held her son and rocked him back and forth, the way she had when he was a baby. Dr. Rebecca Martinez was checking on each child personally, making sure they were healing properly from their ordeal. Most of the kids were doing better than expected. Human children, it turned out, were remarkably resilient when they knew they were loved and safe. "Dr. Martinez," called a voice from across the room. It was Lucy Peterson, the 5-year-old, who had held Jake's hand so tightly during the rescue. Rebecca hurried over to Lucy's bed. "What is it, sweetheart?" Lucy's face was sad. "Everyone else got their mommies and daddies back. Where are mine?" Rebecca's heart broke a little. Lucy's parents had been killed in the attack when the Zephyrians took her from their colony. She was the only child who had no family coming to get her. "Lucy, do you remember Captain Morrison, the man who carried you out of that scary place?" Lucy nodded. "He told me my mommy and daddy loved me." "They did love you very much," Rebecca said gently. "And Captain Morrison wants to talk to you about something very important." Jake had been dreading this conversation, but he knew it had to happen. He walked over to Lucy's bed and sat down in the chair beside it. "Hi, Lucy. How are you feeling?" "Better," Lucy said. "My head doesn't hurt anymore, and the scary dreams are going away." Jake nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. Lucy, Dr. Martinez and I need to talk to you about what happens next." Lucy's eyes got wide. "Am I going back to the scary place?" "No," Jake said firmly. "You're never going back there. But Lucy, your mommy and daddy can't come to get you." Lucy's lips started to tremble. "Why not?" Jake chose his words very carefully. "Remember how I told you that some bad people hurt you? Well, those same bad people hurt your mommy and daddy too. They can't come back, but they will always love you, even though they're gone." Lucy was quiet for a long time, trying to understand what Jake was telling her. Finally, she asked, "What's going to happen to me now?" Jake took a deep breath. "Well, that depends on what you want. There are nice people who take care of children who don't have parents anymore. They could find you a new family to live with." "Or?" Lucy asked. She was a smart little girl and could tell there was another option. Jake smiled. "Or if you want, you could come live with me and my wife Sarah. We live on a space station, and I could teach you how to fly spaceships when you're older." Lucy's eyes lit up. "Would I be your little girl?" "If you want to be," Jake said. "Sarah and I always wanted to have children, and we think you're pretty special." Lucy threw her arms around Jake's neck. "Yes, I want to be your little girl." Jake hugged her back, feeling his heart fill with warmth. Sometimes the most beautiful things could come from the most terrible situations. Across the room, science conductor Vexeni was being held in a secure medical bay under guard. He was not injured, but Admiral Wells had insisted he witness the reunion between the children and their families. Vexeni watched through the window as parents held their rescued children. He saw Billy teaching his little sister how to play a card game they had learned on the ship. He watched as a teenage girl named Emma showed her father pictures she had drawn during her time in captivity. Pictures of home and family that had kept her hope alive. For the first time in his life, Vexnai was beginning to understand what humans called emotion. The bond between these adults and children was not just biological. It was something deeper and more powerful than anything in his scientific databases. Admiral Wells entered Vexnai's room, accompanied by 2 human guards. "It's time for you to go," she announced. "Where are you taking me?" Vexnai asked. "Back to Zephyrian space," Admiral Wells replied. "You're the only survivor we're releasing. The others will face trial with the Galactic Coalition, but you have a different mission." Vexnai was confused. "What mission?" Admiral Wells walked to the window and looked out at the children playing with their families. "Your mission is to go back to your people and make sure this never happens again. You're going to tell them what you saw here. I will report that. Human military response exceeded our projections," Vexnai said. Admiral Wells shook her head. "No, you're going to tell them the truth. You're going to explain that you didn't just attack our colonies or steal our resources. You attacked our children. And when you do that, every human in the galaxy becomes your enemy." Vexnai thought about the battle he had witnessed. Ships arriving from hundreds of light years away, civilians fighting alongside soldiers, captains sacrificing their lives for children they had never met. The response was not logical, Vexnai said. "Love isn't logical," Admiral Wells replied, "but it's the most powerful force in the universe. And every species in this galaxy needs to understand that human children are not test subjects or research materials or bargaining chips. They are our future, and we will do anything to protect them." An hour later, Vexnai was aboard a small transport ship heading back to Zephyrian space. He carried with him a message that would spread throughout the galaxy: never threaten human children. The story of what happened at Kepler 442c became legend. Every alien species learned about the day when humans came from across the galaxy to rescue 42 children. Diplomatic schools taught courses about it. Military academies analyzed the battle tactics. Cultural anthropologists studied the human response for decades. But for Jake Morrison, the most important part of the story was just beginning. 6 months later, he was officially Lucy's adoptive father. She lived with him and Sarah on a space station near Earth, where she attended school and made friends and slowly healed from her terrible experience. Every night before bed, Lucy would ask Jake to tell her the story of how he found her. "Tell me about the day you came to get me," she would say, and Jake would tell her about the brave people who dropped everything to come help. About Dr. Martinez, who carefully removed all the scary machines. About Admiral Wells, who commanded the fleet that defeated the bad aliens. About all the parents who came from far away because they understood how precious children are. "Why did so many people come to help?" Lucy would ask. Jake would tuck her blanket up to her chin and smile. "Because that's what humans do, Lucy. When our children are in danger, we all become family. Every adult becomes a parent. Every parent becomes a protector, and we never ever give up on our kids." Lucy would smile and close her eyes, feeling safe and loved. And somewhere in Zephyrian space, Vexnai was telling his people about the most important lesson he had ever learned. Humans could be bargained with, reasoned with, even defeated in battle. But if you threatened their children, you would discover what it truly meant to face humanity united. The galaxy was a safer place for all children after that day. And in human space, every parent could sleep a little better, knowing that if the worst ever happened, every human in the galaxy would come running to help. The message was clear and would never be forgotten. We are human. We protect our own. And our children are the most precious things in the universe. As Lucy grew up, she would sometimes ask Jake why the aliens had taken her and the other children. Jake would always give her the same answer. Because they didn't understand how much we love you. But now they do. Now everyone in the galaxy knows that human children are not to be touched, not to be harmed, and never to be taken from their families. Years later, when Lucy was old enough to understand the full story, she would realize that she had been at the center of one of the most important moments in galactic history. The day when every species learned that there was one line that must never be crossed. Touch our children and face the fury of every human who ever lived. It was a lesson the galaxy would never forget. War Commander Thex Val made his decision. He would not be intimidated by emotional humans, no matter how many ships they brought. His 12 Zephyrian warships had the most advanced weapons and shields in this part of the galaxy. These humans might have numbers, but the Zephyrians had superior technology. All human vessels, Thex Val announced. You have 10 minutes to leave this system or we will consider you hostile forces and respond accordingly. Down on the planet, Jake was helping Rebecca move the last few children out of the facility. They had managed to free all 42 kids, though many of them were weak and scared. The youngest was a little girl named Lucy Peterson, only 5 years old, who clung to Jake's hand and wouldn't let go. "It's okay, Lucy," Jake said gently. "We're going to take you home to your family." Lucy looked up at him with big brown eyes full of tears. "The scary aliens said my mommy and daddy didn't want me anymore. They said that's why no one came to get me." Jake knelt down so he was at Lucy's eye level. "That's not true, sweetheart. Your mommy and daddy love you very much, and they've been looking for you every single day. We're here because so many people love you and want you to be safe." As Jake spoke to Lucy, Amy's voice came through his radio with urgency. "Captain, the Zephyrians are powering up their weapons. Admiral Wells says all human ships should prepare for battle." Jake looked around at the children who were sitting and lying on the ground around the facility. Some could walk, but others were too weak from months of experiments. They needed more time to get everyone to safety. "Amy, tell Admiral Wells that. We need at least 30 more minutes to get all the children to the transport ships." "I'll pass that along, Captain. But the Zephyrians aren't waiting. They're moving their ships into attack formation." High above the planet, Admiral Wells was, coordinating with the other human commanders. She now had 87 ships under her command, ranging from powerful military vessels to civilian transports that had been converted into emergency medical ships. "All vessels, this is Admiral Wells," she announced. "Priority 1 is protecting those children. Priority 2 is making sure these aliens never hurt another human child again." Captain Ben Collins on the USS Defiance responded first. "Admiral, my ship is ready for battle. Just give the word." Commander Maria Santos checked in next. "Fighter Squadron 7 is standing by. We've got pilots here who have kids of their own back home." But it wasn't just the military personnel who were ready to fight. Captain Tony Foster, who normally carried trade goods between colonies, had loaded his merchant ship with volunteers. "Admiral, I've got 40 civilians aboard who want to help rescue those kids. None of us are soldiers, but we'll do whatever it takes." Dr. Simon Hayes had converted his research vessel into a mobile hospital. "I've got medical teams ready to treat the children as soon as they're brought up from the planet. And Admiral, my ship has defensive weapons too, if you need us to fight." Admiral Wells looked at her tactical display. The Zephyrian ships were definitely more advanced than most of what the humans had brought. In a normal military engagement, 12 Zephyrian warships might be able to defeat 87 human vessels. But this wasn't a normal military engagement. These humans weren't fighting for territory or resources or political power. They were fighting for children. The battle began when Thexval ordered his ships to fire on Dr. Hayes's medical vessel, which was moving closer to the planet to prepare for evacuating the rescued children. The moment the Zephyrian weapons hit the medical ship's shields, something changed in the human fleet. Every captain, every pilot, every crew member felt a surge of pure protective fury. "All ships engage the enemy," Admiral Wells commanded. What happened next violated every rule of space combat that the Zephyrians had studied. Human ships that should have retreated instead charged straight at the enemy. Civilian vessels that had no business in a battle rammed themselves into Zephyrian warships to bring down their shields. Captain Lisa Park was flying a simple cargo hauler that normally carried supplies between mining stations. When she saw the medical ship taking fire, she didn't hesitate. She pointed her ship directly at the nearest Zephyrian vessel and pushed her engines to maximum power. "This is for every kid who ever had a nightmare," she said into her radio as her cargo ship smashed into the Zephyrian warship's shield generator. The explosion destroyed both ships, but it also left the enemy vessel defenseless. Commander Ryan Mitchell led a boarding party from his destroyer onto the damaged Zephyrian ship. His Marines fought through the alien corridors with the intensity that terrified the Zephyrian defenders. These humans didn't fight like normal soldiers. They fought like parents defending their young. Thexval watched his tactical display with growing alarm. His ships were more advanced, but the humans were doing things that made no tactical sense. They were accepting losses that any reasonable military force would never accept. They were taking risks that violated every principle of space warfare. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions," Thexval ordered. But it was too late. The human fleet had surrounded the Zephyrian forces, and every human ship was firing at once. Captain Danny Rodriguez, flying a mining ship with improvised weapons, crashed his vessel into a Zephyrian cruiser's engine section. The alien ship lost power and began drifting helplessly. Admiral Wells coordinated the attack from her battle cruiser, but she was also fighting her own battle. Every time she thought about those children hooked up to machines, every time she imagined her own granddaughter in that situation, her anger grew stronger. "Focus fire on their command ship," she ordered. "I want to have a personal conversation with their war commander." The USS Thunder and 5 other human ships concentrated, their weapons on Thexval's flagship. The Zephyrian shields held for a few minutes, but then began to fail under the relentless assault. Down on the planet, Jake could hear the battle raging in space above them. Explosions lit up the sky like deadly fireworks. He was carrying Lucy, Peterson, toward the transport ship when she looked up and asked, "Are the good guys winning?" Jake looked down at the little girl who had been through so much horror. "Yes, sweetheart. The good guys are winning." Rebecca was loading the last group of children onto the transport when her radio crackled. "Dr. Martinez, this is Dr. Hayes on the medical ship. We're ready to receive patients." "Sending them up now," Rebecca replied. "Some of these kids are going to need weeks of recovery, but they're all going to be okay." In space, the battle was reaching its end. 8 of the 12 Zephyrian ships had been destroyed or disabled. The remaining 4 were trying to retreat, but human ships blocked every escape route. Thexval's flagship was badly damaged and losing air. Most of his crew was dead or wounded. He finally understood what the Coalition command had tried to warn him about. Humans fighting to protect their children were not like other military forces. His communication system flickered to life, and Admiral Wells's voice filled his bridge. War Commander Thexaval, surrender now and prepare to be boarded. I do not understand, Thexaval said, his mechanical voice now filled with confusion and fear. We studied your military capabilities. We analyzed your weapons and tactics. How did you defeat us so easily? Admiral Wells's response was cold as space itself. You studied our capabilities. You never studied our hearts. The remaining Zephyrian ships surrendered one by one. The battle was over, and not a single human child had been harmed during the fighting. Jake stood on the planet's surface, watching as the last transport ship disappeared into the sky, carrying the rescued children to safety. Lucy Peterson had been reluctant to let go of his hand, but she finally agreed to go with Dr. Martinez to the medical ship. Captain, Amy's voice came through his radio, Admiral Wells wants to speak with you. Jake activated his communicator. Yes, Admiral? Jake, we've captured most of the Zephyrian survivors. There's one in particular I think you should meet, their science conductor who was in charge of the experiments. Bring him down to the planet, Jake said. I want him to see what he did to those children. An hour later, a Zephyrian scientist named Vexnai was brought to the empty facility where the children had been imprisoned. He was smaller than Thexval, with the same gray skin and yellow eyes, but his expression was different. He looked confused and frightened. Jake walked Vexnai through the rooms where the children had been kept. He showed him the beds with the restraints, the machines that had been attached to young minds, the medical equipment that had been used to monitor the kids' fear and stress. This is what you did, Jake said simply. You took children away from their families and treated them like laboratory animals. Vexnai looked around the facility with new eyes. For the first time, he was seeing it not as a research laboratory, but as a place where young beings had been held prisoner and subjected to frightening procedures. We did not understand, Vexnai said quietly. We studied your species' military strength, your technology, your political systems. We thought we knew what humans were capable of. Jake nodded. You studied our capabilities. You never studied what we would do to protect our children. Your response was unprecedented, Vexnai continued. Ships came from hundreds of light years away. Civilians fought alongside military personnel. Captains sacrificed their own lives to save others. This does. Amy Chen sat at her communication station aboard the USS Horizon, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she sent out the most important message of her life. Code Black was not something humans used lightly. It meant children were in immediate danger, and it overrode every other priority in human space. The message was simple but carried enormous weight. Code Black. Alien forces have abducted human children. Coordinates attached. All available ships respond immediately. This is not a drill. Within minutes, Amy started getting responses. The first came from Captain Ben Collins aboard the heavy cruiser USS Defiance, which was patrolling a trade route 3 systems away. Message received, Horizon. We are burning our engines hard to reach you. Estimated arrival time, 6 hours. Then came another message from Commander Maria Santos with Fighter Squadron 7. Copy that, Code Black. We're dropping everything and heading your way. But it wasn't just military ships that were responding. Amy watched in amazement as civilian vessels began checking in too. This is Captain Tony Foster on the merchant ship New Dawn. We're loaded with medical supplies and changing course to assist. Doctor. Simon Hayes here on the research vessel Healing Touch. We have full medical facilities and are coming as fast as we can. The messages kept coming. Transport ships, mining vessels, exploration craft, colony defense forces, everyone was dropping what they were doing and racing toward Kepler 442c. Meanwhile, down on the planet's surface, Jake and his team had managed to get inside the facility. Danny had disabled the door locks, and they were moving carefully through the halls full of imprisoned children. The first room they entered held 20 kids, all between 8 and 14 years old. They were awake now, and when they saw Jake and his team, hope filled their eyes. "Are you here to take us home?" asked a small boy with red hair and freckles. "Yes, we are," Rebecca said gently, kneeling beside his bed and starting to remove the wires from his head. "What's your name, sweetie?" "I'm Billy," the boy said. "I'm from New Texas Colony. They took me from my bedroom while I was sleeping. My mom and dad must be so worried." Jake felt his anger growing even stronger as he listened to Billy's story. These children had been ripped away from their families and brought to this horrible place to be treated like laboratory animals. "Rebecca, how long will it take to safely disconnect all these kids from the machines?" Jake asked. Rebecca was examining the medical equipment carefully. "These neural monitors are very advanced. If I remove them too quickly, it could hurt the children. I need at least 30 minutes per child to do it safely." Jake did quick math in his head. With 40 children in the facility, it would take Rebecca 20 hours to free them all by herself. They didn't have that much time. "Danny, can you and Lisa help Rebecca? I'll try to find more medical supplies and see if there are other staff members we can get to help us." As they worked to free the children, Amy's voice came through their radios with regular updates from space. "Captain, the USS Defiance has arrived and is taking position near the Zephyrian ships. Captain Collins says he has a full Marine unit ready for ground assault." "Tell him to wait for my orders," Jake replied as he helped a scared little girl sit up in her bed. "We don't want to start shooting with children in the middle of everything." 30 minutes later, Amy had more news. "Captain, you're not going to believe this. We now have 17 human ships in the system, and more are arriving every hour. Word is spreading faster than I've ever seen." Jake wasn't surprised. He knew how humans felt about their children. It didn't matter if you were military or civilian, rich or poor, from Earth or from the farthest colony. When kids were in danger, humans came running. Up in space, War Commander Thexaval was beginning to realize that something very unusual was happening. His sensors showed more human ships arriving in the system every few minutes. This was not the response his databases had predicted. Thexaval contacted the Galactic Coalition headquarters to ask for advice. The Coalition was like the United Nations of Space, where all the different alien species work together to keep peace. "This is War Commander Thexaval of the Zephyrian Empire," he said into his communication device. "We are conducting legal scientific research, but human forces are gathering in our research system. We request Coalition support for our lawful activities." The response he got was not what he expected. "War Commander Thexaval, this is Coalition Command. We have reviewed your research permits and found no authorization for experiments involving sentient juveniles. Furthermore, we strongly advise you to evacuate the system immediately." "Evacuate?" Thexaval was confused. "Why would we evacuate? We have superior firepower to the human forces." There was a long pause before Coalition Command responded. "War Commander, you have taken human children. We cannot guarantee your safety if you remain in that system." Thexaval ended the communication, feeling even more confused. Why was everyone acting like he had done something terrible? His research was advancing scientific knowledge. The human children were being kept in good condition. Their own species would benefit from the data he was gathering. He decided to try reasoning with the humans one more time. He contacted Captain Morrison directly. Captain Morrison, I am detecting a significant buildup of human forces in this system. This is an overreaction to a simple research operation. Jake's voice came back cold and hard. Simple research operation? You kidnapped children from their families. We acquired necessary test subjects, HFY corrected. Your species' emotional response to this situation is inefficient and illogical. Let me explain something to you, Jake said. Those children you're experimenting on, they have mothers and fathers who would die to protect them. They have brothers and sisters who miss them. They have friends who are wondering where they went. HFY consulted his cultural database about human family structures. Yes, we are aware that humans form emotional attachments to their offspring. However, the greater good of scientific advancement should take priority over individual emotional concerns. You don't understand, Jake said. Those aren't just individual emotional concerns. Every human who has ever had a child, every human who was ever a child, every human who ever loved a child is going to want to see you stopped. As if to prove Jake's point, Amy's voice came through the radio with another update. Captain, we now have 43 human ships in the system. Admiral Patricia Wells is here with the battlecruiser USS Thunder, and she's asking to speak with you. Admiral Wells was one of the most respected commanders in human space. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, and she had never lost a battle. Jake accepted the communication. Admiral Wells, thank you for coming. Jake, I got word that someone took our kids, Admiral Wells said. Her voice sounded like barely controlled thunder. My own granddaughter is only 6 years old. The thought of someone taking her and hooking her up to machines makes me want to turn this entire system into space dust. Ma'am, we're working on getting the children out safely, Jake reported. Dr. Martinez has freed about half of them so far. Good, Admiral Wells said. I've got medical ships standing by to take care of those kids as soon as you get them out. And Jake? Yes, ma'am. I've also got enough firepower here to crack this planet in half if necessary. Those aliens have exactly one chance to do the right thing. HFY had been listening to the human communications, and he was finally starting to understand that he might have miscalculated. His sensors now showed 68 human ships in the system, with more arriving every few minutes. But HFY was a military commander, and he had never backed down from a fight. He had 12 powerful Zephyrian warships with advanced weapons and shields. Surely that was enough to handle a bunch of humans who were acting on emotion instead of logic. He opened a channel to all the human ships in the system. Human vessels, this is War Commander HFY. You are interfering with a legitimate scientific research operation. We offer you one final compromise. We will return 25% of the test subjects if you withdraw from this system immediately. The silence that followed his offer lasted for almost a full minute. Then Admiral Wells responded, and her voice carried the weight of every human parent who had ever feared for their child. War Commander HFY, let me make our position very clear. You are going to release every single human child in your facility within the next hour. You are going to surrender yourself and your crew for trial by the Galactic Coalition. And you are going to pray that those children are unharmed. And if we refuse? HFY asked. Then you're going to learn why humans have a saying, hell hath no fury like a parent whose child is threatened. Jake's heart began beating very fast. Children's voices calling for help could only mean one thing. Something terrible was happening in that building. Everyone move quickly but stay quiet, Jake whispered into his radio. Rebecca, bring your medical kit. Danny, do you have any tools that can open locked doors? Yes, Captain, Danny replied, patting the tool bag on his belt. I can get us through almost any door. They moved carefully toward the large metal building. Up close, it looked even more frightening. The walls were smooth and had no decorations. There were no windows at all, just small air vents near the top. It looked exactly like a prison. Lisa used her scanner to check for guards or security systems. I'm not seeing any movement outside, but there are definitely people inside, lots of them. Jake counted at least 30 heat signatures on Lisa's screen. Most of them were very small, the size of children. They found a side door that looked less protected than the main entrance. Danny pulled out his electronic lockpicker and got to work. Within 2 minutes, the door clicked open. Good job, Jake said quietly. Now remember, we don't know what we're walking into. Stay together and be ready for anything. They stepped into a long white hallway that smelled like a hospital. The walls were covered with strange alien writing that none of them could read. Bright lights hung from the ceiling, making everything look cold and sterile. They could hear voices coming from deeper in the building. Some were the mechanical voices of Zephyrians, but others were definitely human. Young human voices that sounded scared and confused. "This way," Rebecca whispered, pointing down a hallway toward the voices. They crept along the wall until they reached a door with a small window. Jake looked through it and felt his blood turn to ice. The room was full of small beds arranged in perfect rows. In each bed was a human child, probably between 5 and 16 years old. They all had wires attached to their heads, and screens next to each bed showed brain activity patterns. Most of the children appeared to be sleeping, but a few were awake and looking around with frightened eyes. Zephyrian scientists in white coats moved between the beds, checking the machines and making notes on electronic tablets. They treated the children like they were just objects to be studied. "Oh my God," Rebecca whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "They're experimenting on kids." Jake had to lean against the wall to keep from falling down. In all his years in space, he had never seen anything so horrible. These weren't just any children. They were human children, taken from their families and brought to this awful place. Danny's hands were shaking with anger. "Captain, we have to do something right now." "We will," Jake said, his voice sounding harder than steel. "But first we need to understand what we're dealing with. Lisa, can you count how many children are in there?" Lisa pressed her face to the window. "I count at least 40, maybe more in other rooms." Jake activated his radio. "Amy, contact War Commander Thexaval immediately. Tell him I need to speak with him right now." "Right away, Captain," Amy's voice came back through the radio. While I thought they waited, Rebecca studied the medical equipment she could see through the window. "Those machines are monitoring brain activity. It looks like they're studying how human minds work, especially young minds that are still developing." "But why?" Lisa asked. "What could they possibly want to learn from children?" Before anyone could answer, Amy's voice came through the radio again. "Captain, I have Thexaval on the line." Jake stepped away from the door and pressed his radio button. "Thexaval, I want an explanation right now. What are human children doing in your facility?" There was a pause before the alien's mechanical voice replied. "Ah, Captain Morrison. I see you have discovered our research operation. There is no need for concern." "No need for concern." Jake's voice got louder, despite his efforts to stay quiet. "You have dozens of human children hooked up to machines. Where did they come from?" They were collected from various human colonies in this sector over the past several months, Thexval said, as if he was talking about gathering rocks instead of kidnapping children. We required subjects for our cognitive development studies. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. You mean you stole them from their families? We acquired necessary research materials, Thexval corrected. Human children possess remarkable neuroplasticity. Their brains adapt and learn at rates that far exceed our projections. This data is essential for improving our own species' development protocols. Rebecca grabbed Jake's arm. Captain, some of these children have been here for months based on their medical readings. They've been separated from their parents all this time. Jake pressed the radio button so hard he thought he might break it. Thexval, those are not research materials. Those are children with families who love them and are probably going crazy with worry right now. Your emotional attachment to offspring is noted in our cultural files, Thexval said. However, the scientific value of this research outweighs such concerns. We are learning invaluable information about cognitive enhancement. You're torturing kids, Danny shouted. We are conducting necessary scientific research, Thexval replied calmly. The subjects are kept in adequate condition and feel no significant discomfort. Jake looked back through the window at a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She was awake and looking around with big, scared eyes. She reminded him of his own niece back on Earth. Thexval, I'm giving you one chance to do the right thing, Jake said. Release all of these children immediately and return them to their families. That is not possible, the alien replied. Our research is at a critical stage. However, we are reasonable beings. We propose a compromise. Jake waited, though every part of him wanted to smash down the door and start grabbing children. We will return half of the subjects to you, Thexval continued. In exchange, you will allow us to complete our research with the remaining specimens. As additional compensation, we will share valuable technological data with your species. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Rebecca, Lisa, and Danny were all staring at him, waiting to see what he would say. Jake had been a diplomat for many years. He knew how to negotiate and find peaceful solutions to problems. But as he looked at those frightened children through the window, something changed inside him. Some lines could not be crossed. Some compromises could not be made. Thexval, Jake said, his voice now completely calm. Let me make something very clear to you. You are going to release every single child in that facility right now. All of them. Not half, not most. Every single one. That is not acceptable, Thexval replied. Your research is over, Jake interrupted. You have exactly 1 hour to prepare those children for transport back to their families. After that, this stops being a diplomatic conversation. Captain Morrison, I believe you misunderstand the situation. We have superior firepower and... Jake cut off the communication and turned to his team. His face looked like it was carved from stone. Amy, he said into his radio, send an emergency message to every human ship, colony, and military base within 500 light years. Use code Black authorization. Amy's voice came back immediately. Code Black, Captain? Are you sure? I'm sure. Tell them that alien forces have taken human children. Send our exact coordinates and tell them to come as fast as they can. Lisa looked confused. Captain, what's Code Black? Jake was already heading toward the door where the children were being held. Code Black means our kids are in danger. And when that message goes out, every human in this part of the galaxy is going to stop whatever they're doing and come here. But, Captain, Rebecca said. What if the Zephyrians have more ships? What if we can't win? Jake paused at the door and looked back at his team. In his eyes, they could see something they had never seen before. A cold, determined fury that had nothing to do with diplomacy or negotiation. Rebecca, he said quietly, they took our children. After today, the Zephyrians will learn that was the biggest mistake they ever made. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon, watching the blue and green planet slowly turn below them. The year was 2387, and humanity had been part of the big galaxy community for almost 200 years. They had made friends with many alien species and learned to work together in peace. Jake was a good captain. He had short brown hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. His crew trusted him completely. Next to him stood Lisa Torres, his navigator. She was smart and always knew exactly where they were going. Danny Brooks worked in the engine room, keeping their ship running perfectly. Amy Chen sat at the communications desk, listening to radio signals from across space. The planet they were studying was called Kepler 442c. It was far from Earth, in a quiet part of space where few ships ever traveled. The planet had valuable metals and crystals that the galaxy needed. Jake's job was to make maps and count resources, then report back to Earth. "Captain, I'm getting some strange readings from the planet's surface," Lisa said, looking at her computer screen with a frown. Jake walked over to look. The screen showed heat patterns from the planet below. Most of the surface was cold, but there were several warm spots that looked like buildings or machines. "That's odd," Jake said. "The report said this planet was empty. No cities, no people living here." Danny's voice came through the speaker from the engine room. "Captain, I'm picking up energy signatures down there. Someone is definitely using power on that planet." Before Jake could respond, Amy turned around in her chair. Her face looked worried. "Captain, we're getting a message from another ship. They say they're from something called the Zephyrian Empire." Jake had heard that name before. The Zephyrians were known across the galaxy as a very organized and powerful military race. They were smart and had good technology, but they were also cold and cared only about being efficient. They thought emotions were a waste of time. "Put them on screen, Amy," Jake ordered. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at an alien face. The creature had gray skin that looked like metal and bright yellow eyes that seemed to glow. Its head was longer than a human head, and it had no hair at all. "I am War Commander Thexval of the Zephyrian Empire," the alien said. Its voice sounded like a machine talking. "You are in a system we are currently using for resource collection." Jake stepped forward. "I'm Captain Morrison of the human vessel USS Horizon. We're here on a peaceful mission to study this planet. We had no idea anyone else was here." Thexval's yellow eyes studied Jake for a moment. "Humans. We have read about your species. You are known for being adaptable and creative. Perhaps we can work together while we both complete our tasks here." Something about the way the alien spoke made Jake feel uncomfortable, but he tried to stay polite. "What kind of resources are you collecting, if you don't mind me asking?" "Various materials needed for our research projects," Thexval replied. "Nothing that should interfere with your mineral surveys." Jake decided it would be best to be friendly. After all, the galaxy was a big place, and there was room for everyone. "Well, I'm sure we can stay out of each other's way. Is there anything we should know about your operations?" "We will send you coordinates of areas to avoid," Thexval said. "Your cooperation is appreciated." The screen went dark, and Jake was left staring at his reflection. Something felt wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Lisa, take us down to the planet's surface, Jake ordered. But keep us away from those coordinates they're going to send. Danny, make sure our engines are ready for a quick takeoff if we need it. Why, Captain? Lisa asked. Do you think there might be trouble? Jake shook his head. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too careful, but something about that conversation didn't feel right. 2 hours later, they landed on the planet in a small valley far from the Zephyrian operations. The air was breathable and the gravity felt almost like Earth. Jake put together a small team to explore. Himself, Lisa, Danny, and Dr. Rebecca Martinez, their medical officer. Rebecca was a kind woman who cared deeply about helping others. She had joined the crew because she wanted to see new worlds and help people who lived far from Earth's hospitals. They walked across rocky ground toward some interesting mineral formations. The planet was quiet except for the wind blowing through. Strange purple plants that looked like earth trees but felt soft like cloth. Captain, Lisa said, checking her scanner, I'm reading some kind of structure about 2 miles north of here. It's not on any of our maps. Jake looked through his binoculars. In the distance, he could see what looked like a large metal building with no windows. It was definitely not natural. That's strange, Rebecca said. Why would the Zephyrians build something way out here? I thought they said they were just collecting resources. Danny kicked at a rock with his boot. Maybe it's some kind of mining operation, though it looks more like a prison than a mine. Jake felt that uncomfortable feeling in his stomach getting stronger. Let's take a closer look, but everyone stay alert. Something isn't right here. They walked toward the building, trying to stay hidden behind rocks and the strange purple plants. As they got closer, Jake could see that the building was much larger than it had appeared from far away. It was at least 3 stories tall and very long. Captain, Amy's voice came through their radio from the ship. I'm picking up some very weak radio signals coming from that direction. They sound like distress calls. Jake stopped walking. A cold feeling went down his spine. What kind of distress calls? Amy's voice was quiet when she answered. They sound like children, Captain, human children.